WP-Get Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. Okay, so today's video is a little bit of a breakaway from what I normally do. Most of my tutorials I've been using Elementor or Elementor add-ons. Today I'm actually just looking at just raw HTML, CSS and JavaScript to display portfolio items in some nice ways. I've seen some tutorials on this and it wasn't quite meeting what I wanted to do, so I just thought I'd come up with my own way and show two different ways that I'm looking at doing this. I will then make a supplementary video a little bit later and show you how we can implement this in Elementor. And by the way, I haven't actually done that yet, so I'll do this and then I'll work that out later. So this is a really neat way to show portfolios of things when you're looking at how does this look on a responsively on desktops, mobiles, tablets, all that sort of stuff. So what I'm doing here is the typical one that I've seen is when you roll your mouse over one of these devices, it scrolls from the top to the bottom. So just looking at the second one here, roll my mouse over and it scrolls from the top to the bottom. Now, obviously on the desktop view, which I've got here showing on a tablet, and I'll explain why a little bit later, the screen is a lot shorter, so there's less to scroll, whereas on the mobile, there's more to scroll. So it looks like it's a bit quicker because it's taking time to do that. The second option I've looked at is using a scroll group where we use our mouse wheel, and I want both of these to scroll by the same percentage as I use my mouse wheel. So if I roll my mouse over the mobile, see my cursor changes to the arrow up and down, and I get a little message up the top here saying use mouse wheel to scroll. So if I scroll there, you can see on the right hand side that's scrolling slightly because we're scrolling by the same percentage. So when we get to the bottom of the mobile, we're at the bottom of the tablet. Now if I go to the right and I scroll with my mouse wheel on that, same deal. As I scroll from the top to the bottom, the left hand side looks like it's scrolling a lot quicker. And the reason for that is because that's a lot taller content. So for the same amount of scroll, it's covering a greater distance. So that's pretty much what I want to go through today and show you how that works. Now I'm just going to quickly just have a look here. And if I go into this scroll group, I'm just going to show you an example of this. And we'll come back to this and go through it all. If I just duplicated that and save that, now I've actually got two of these scroll wheel items, and they're scrolling independently of each other. So if I change the background images in these, I'm going to have a completely different image, and these two are grouped and they're separate from the items above. So I'm just going to get rid of that again. Now, okay, so tools I'll be using today is I normally work with multiple screens, but I'm squeezing this into one screen where I've got my editor, IDE, on the right hand side here, and my Chrome browser on the left hand side. And with this editor, which is IntelliJ IDEA, which you could also use PHP Storm, or if you got a Mac, I'm sure there's other things like Xcode and things like that you can use for the Mac, where what I can do here is when I preview this in a browser, every time I save something, the browser updates with those changes. So it's a really, really nice way to work. So let's head over to where I start from to get these. So what I need first is a mobile mask and a tablet mask. Now, what I've done is I've downloaded a template from Envato Elements for responsive devices. There's heaps of them on there. I just grabbed one that looked okay. I've then gone and edited these in Photoshop, and I've just made the backgrounds of all of these transparent. The one that I downloaded actually had a white background and then a layer where you add an image and it automatically sizes it in there. I've deleted the image layer. I've gone through the white background, just masked it and deleted that so it's completely transparent. Then, for example, on the phone, I just go to the layer for the phone, right click on it and export as, and then I can set a size. I've got this on 50% at the moment. Let's say the maximum width of my phone display is going to be 300. I can put that 300 pixels. Have a look over here once it's calculated, and it's only going to be 47K. So really you only need to export this at the maximum width or height that you're going to display it at. So if I say 500 pixels, that's going to export it, and it's going to be 101K. Still okay. So whatever works for you. So basically your mobile, your tablet, export that. Same deal. So that's going to, I'll put that at 33%. So it's going to be 800 wide by 1046 high. I actually rotated this after I exported because I wanted it to be landscape. But let's say the height, because we're going to rotate, this is going to become the width. So the maximum width of that's maybe going to be, say, 700. That's going to calculate that. So it's only going to be a 43K image. So if I export that there, rotate it, save it, it's only going to be 43K. So that's how we do our masks. So I use these two. The reason I haven't done the laptop is because it's more difficult, because it's got the screen on an angle here. It's more difficult to rotate and align all the content with that. You can do it, but it's sort of easier to do them face on. So if I wanted to do a desktop screen or something like that, I'll probably get an image of a Mac and having it face on, and then align everything with that, and then rotate it using CSS. So for this demonstration, I've just done the mobile and the tablet, which I've later created as a landscape image. Going to my IDE here, what I've then done is I've got the laptop transparent, which I'm not using, got the phone transparent, and the tablet transparent. So if I look at this, say, phone transparent, there it is there. Or if I look at my laptop transparent, sorry, tablet landscape transparent, there it is there. So those are the masks that I'm using here. I've then gone into Responsively app, which is a free download, unbelievably good tool, and I've added a few sizes here, and I brought up a site which I'm demonstrating here. Bring it all up, and then 3 dots, full page screenshot. I'm then using the FHD one because I want to see what it's like at a full width. I'm then displaying that on a tablet screen just so that it shrinks down to that. And what that does is, same deal here, is full page screenshot. That saves them into a folder under these big long names. You can then rename them mobile full, FHD full, if you wanted to, because we're only going to display these at a smaller size. You could actually go into these in Photoshop and save that at a smaller size. So we just make that high, and maybe we only want that to be, say, I don't know, 700 wide. And that would give us a much smaller file size. If I wanted to go into that depth, I think I would. If I was going to have a number of these on a page, I would actually size these to the maximum width that they're going to be displayed at. But that's up to you. So that's basically the preparation of the images that we need. So code. Let's look at the mouse over code. So the markup is pretty simple. So that's this block here. All I've done is just put a border on this and some padding on it just to separate it from the other section. Just an H1 with my title. I've got a perspective container, and then I've got my mobile hover preview. Okay, the reason we have that, and I'm going to show you up the code further up here. The perspective container, I'm telling it that I want to be 2000 pixels away from this, looking at it. So when we rotate it, it's like we're standing 2000 pixels back. If I change that to, say, 500, hit save, these all change because it's like you're closer in, the camera's closer in. So you get a much more exaggerated, rotation. Now, with all rotation and scaling effects with CSS, they can escape outside your bounding box. So you need to add some additional padding to allow for that. I didn't want it to be that much. So if I went, say 1500, for example, that still looks pretty good. I just like the more of a subtle rotate at 2000 pixel perspective. So I'm setting the display to inline block and the width to auto because we want that container just rotate within the contents, not the full width or wider than that, because it just looks weird. So that's just to contain where the perspective is rotating from. So we then have our preview for the mobile, and I'm telling it I want that content to be only 256 pixels maximum width. We want a relative position and we want to rotate it. If we take the rotation off here and hit save, on the left-hand side, see we've lost our rotation. Okay, so that's pretty much that. Now the device, which is the background image, we want that to be 100% of the width of this container, and position of relative and a z-index of 2 to stick it on top of the other content. And we want to disable the pointer events so that as you mouse over, the elements underneath it will actually get the mouse events. If you don't do this, your mouse over events will not translate through to the elements that are underneath the container. So we turn off the pointer events with that. We then take our site image. Actually, I might just bring up the Chrome Dev tool so we can actually look at this as we go. So we go to our site image. So that's our preview site image. Underneath that, we want to say the position of it is absolute. And I'm going to work through how we work out these percentages here shortly. And the z-index is 1. So remember, we got the mask at a z-index of 2. By putting this as 1 or 0, whatever, that's going to put it underneath the mask. Overflow we want to be hidden, so just fill the contents of that container, and then overflow, set that to hidden so that it's not being displayed. Border radius of 5 we'll come back to. We don't want to repeat the image. I'm going to set it to cover so it'll fit whatever available width and then or height, and then scale accordingly. And we want to put our position of our background at the very top. We want to have a transition of the background of 2 seconds. So if I roll my mouse over, and then I'll roll my mouse out, it takes 2 seconds for that to return. Okay, so that's the default return of that. Okay, that's pretty much that. Now, I'll come back to these percentages here shortly. And then on the hover, we want the background position to be bottom. And in this case, we're saying for the mobile, we want it to be over 10 seconds. So if I roll my mouse over there, it takes 10 seconds to get from the top to the bottom. So if you want that to be quicker, you can use a smaller number. And we want the cursor to be a pointer, so we know that we're actually doing something. We could change that to a S resize or something like that, so that changes to, whoops. It changes to arrows instead, if you wanted to. Totally up to you. So that's pretty much it. So when we're on the mobile hover preview for the site image, when we hover over it, we want to move the background to the bottom over 10 seconds. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's stick with the mobile for now and how we work out these percentages here. The best way to do this is, first of all, we're going to remove our rotation so we can see clearly what we're doing. We've got no rotation there. Now, if I roll my mouse over the site image and you see the blue box representation in Chrome, you can see it's kind of around about where the screen settings are, but you can see the left-hand side is sitting a little bit over the black. So there's the black there, that's sitting just a little bit over the black. So if I wanted to, I could actually move that left across a little bit by choosing my left here. Let's make that, say, 5%. Okay. And if I roll my mouse over it now, it's kind of lined up to the left. If I made it, say, 6%, and then roll my mouse over that side image again, it's still okay. If I made it 7%, so it's going to depend on your mask image that you use. 7% is too far. See, I've got white between the black and where the display is, which is what I don't want. So I think 6% was about right. And then we look at the right-hand side, and the right-hand side is just slightly over the black as well. So let's look at the right and make that, say, 5%. And have a look at the side image again. It's still slightly over the black. If we make it 6%, you can see a little bit of white down the side of that. So let's make it 6.5%. And that's pretty close to where it needs to be, isn't it? No, it's less. It's too far. So if we made it 5.5%. Okay. Now have a look. That looks pretty good. So I'd then go back to my code here and I'd update my left to 6% and right to 5.5. So left to 6 and right to 5.5. And if I save my changes and have a look at that now it's in the right spot. So we got the right amount of screen space to display this, and that will fit within that screen space. So play with this so I can now actually see that I've got a little bit of white, slight little bit of white to the left of my hero header. So I'd probably make that a little bit less on the left. So maybe make that maybe 5.5. Doesn't have to be absolutely accurate. Okay, now I've got rid of that white on the left-hand side, and that's close enough for a preview. Okay, so that's how you work out your top, left, bottom, and right. I'm using percentage because we want this to be scalable. So I've set a max width, but let's say we want the want it to be able to scale down. As it scales down, the actual width is going to change, which means we need to have percentages. Otherwise, we're going to end up with the wrong spacing. So let's, for example, I go here and I make that max width, say 350 pixels. So now it's wider, but all of the spacing is still the same. So using percentages gives us that level of accuracy for the spacing. So I'll go back to 250 pixels here. Okay, so that's how we work out all of this. I then give it a little bit of a border radius, and that is just in case, depending on your mask, maybe your edge might sort of stick out where you can just see a corner up here. Give it a bit of a border radius, and that it just rounds out that corner so it doesn't stick out from your mask. Depending on your mask, you might have a thinner mask than what I've got, so you may or may not need to do that. But just for me, it's a good practice. So that's pretty much your mobile. I'm just going to add my transform back so it rotates again. There it is there. And there we go, pretty much straightforward. One last thing I'm going to mention here is with the, where are we? The mobile. So this background transition of 10 seconds on the mobile. If you're not happy with that, we can just copy that and override it on here by, in the style, we've got the background image of the mobile full. So that's the mobile full. We can actually just paste that into the style there and make that, say, 4 seconds. Save that. Now it's a much quicker scroll. We can make it, say, 20 seconds. That's a very slow scroll. So you can override these default settings here by using the style attributes on the tags. Now, I would probably say you would do this because your preview images for your different websites are all going to be different heights. So they're going to scroll at different speeds. So you might want to play around with that for each preview and work out what works best for that particular height. So easy to override. I can even duplicate this. If I duplicated that whole section there and then make this one, say, 5 seconds. So this one here is over 20 seconds and that one there is over 5 seconds. Okay, let's get rid of that. All right, so that's pretty much that. Now the tablet is just exactly the same thing. The only difference here is that the where are we? The tablet preview, we're rotating by minus 20 degrees and we're setting a max width to 600. So if I make that 500, there it is there. So the tablet view is smaller, but all of the lining up of all these edges is the same because of the percentages that we've used. So 600. All right, so that's the hover containers dealt with. The next one's a little bit trickier. So the next one is using mouse wheel to scroll a group. So anywhere within this grey border, if I use my mouse wheel, it's going to scroll both by the same percentage. Okay, so as I roll over each of these, I get a little tag to say, hey, use your mouse wheel, but it does actually work outside of there because they're all inside the scroll container. Okay, so how we do that is, first of all, we need to create an extra wrapper, which we call a mouse wheel group, and we'll use JavaScript to match all that. The rest of this is pretty much the same, except for the hover. In the hover, we have no transitions. Up here we've got the transition from hover of a background position. We don't have any transitions whatsoever on that. Okay, so apart from that, the rest of the markup is exactly the same. Okay, now the only other thing in here, sorry, that's not exactly true. The other thing we put in there is this mouse wheel preview container, hover before we're adding this content, styling it up a bit. So as our mouse rolls over it, we get this little tag at the top here. So you can change that to whatever you like, style it however you like. Okay, but that's pretty much it. The device settings, everything here is pretty much the same. If you want to play with these, take the rotation off first. So up here, take your rotation off, then play with those percentages, just like you did with the other one. Okay, now all of this is exactly the same. All right, transition back 2 seconds. I actually don't even need that. I can take that out. I just copied this previously. We don't need that. So let's not confuse it because we're not transitioning with CSS. Okay, there we go. All right, so our markup here. So the difference between the hover to scroll and this one is we've got an extra wrapper, which is the mouse wheel group. Okay, and then we have our same perspective container, same markup down here, same everything. So this markup here from there down is identical to the hover. Okay, so we set our background images the same, so these could be different images. If I take this and duplicate it, I'll end up with 2 separate groups. So this top group, I can scroll the bottom. See, the bottom one's not scrolling at all. If I go to the bottom one's scrolling. These two scroll in unison with each other, and these two scroll with unison with each other. So that's pretty much the markup for it. Now, this is where it gets really tricky. So the JavaScript. Okay. Now I'm setting 2 variables, which is basically my mouse wheel groups, because you can have, as I just demonstrated, you can have multiples of these. And how much do I want to increment by? So if I say increment by, say 10, that's 10%. Okay, every time I scroll, it increments by 10%. If I increment by 2%, every time I scroll, it's a much smaller scroll. Okay, so I found somewhere around the 4 was something I was happy with. So if I'm scrolling here, okay, so that's basically 2 variables. We're waiting for the DOM content to be loaded, and then we run our init function. Now the init function, and I'm using pure JS, I'm not using any jQuery here because we don't need to, is the first thing we're doing is getting all of the mouse wheel groups. So that's every one of these containers with a pair of scrolling views. So we get all of those, we iterate through them all, and we're going to set the attribute of data scroll to 0. So let's bring up my DevTools and have a look at my mouse wheel group here. So I've got a data scroll of 72. If I scroll with my mouse, you can see that changing the data scroll. Okay, and that's just to keep track of where we are at with that group when we scroll with our mouse wheel. So that's just basically initializing all of those to 0, and it has to be in quotations because you can't set an integer on a data attribute. It's got to be a string. Okay, a little note here is that we're going to now listen for all the on-wheel events. We cannot use our ES6 arrow functions here because of context. So with the on-wheel event, if I use my keyword this, keyword here refers to the item that triggered it. Okay. Unfortunately, with ES6, when we use the arrow function, this context is the enclosure that it's in. So this would be this whole enclosure here, which I think actually even maps through to the window object. So this does not refer to that item when you use the arrow functions, and the event doesn't pass the element through. So I'm not sure of another way we can do this apart from just using the ES 2005 functions, where this context is the actual item that triggered the event. So what we're doing is getting the current scroll from this data scroll attribute. Oh, let's go back to that. We're getting the current scroll. So what is it currently? We're going to get an integer for that. And we want to set a new scroll. So what we're looking for is the event delta y, so how much did the mouse scroll by? And when you're on these elements, it seems to be either minus 100 or 100 or plus 100. When you're scrolling the window, you actually get a smaller amount, but for some reason, with the way browsers work, you just get minus 100 or plus 100, depending on what direction you're going in. So we're saying if it's greater than 0, we're scrolling up. Now, what we're going to do here is if we're scrolling up and the current scroll is already equal to 100 or more, do nothing, just return. Okay, now that's going to then use the standard event scroll. So once we get to the bottom of this, it will scroll normally. When we get to the top of that, it will scroll normally. Okay, so by looking for whether it's already at 100%, then just return and just run the normal scroll events. That's what that does there. If it's not at 100%, new scroll is a current scroll plus our increment, which we defined up here. And then we call a function to set the inner container scroll, pass in this element, and what the new scroll value is, which we'll look at next. And this is the exact opposite. So if it's a negative number, then, and it's not less than, or not, sorry, if it's less than and equal to 0, return. Otherwise, the new scroll is the current scroll minus the increment, and then set the container scroll. All right, now, if any of these conditions were applied and we didn't return, we want to prevent the wheel scroll event from doing its default behavior. So we say prevent default, and then it will stick within there without scrolling the screen. Okay. So the next part is the actual function to scroll the inner container. So what we do is for that particular scroll container, get all of the MW, BG, scroll, mouse wheel, BG scroll. So if we look inside this container, we've got a perspective container. Inside our perspective container, we've got a side image with MW, BG scroll. So we've got two of those, one for the mobile, one for the tablet. So get all those. And then what we want to do is set the attribute on the mouse wheel. So that's this up here, the data scroll. Set that to the new value as a string. Okay, so it's an integer at the moment, convert it to a string so that we won't get a JavaScript error. Iterate through each of the MWBG scroll elements that it found and set the background position to the integer as a string plus a percentage. So that'll go from 0 to 100%. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, this part here I've commented out, I'm just going to remove that. What that does, it can get confusing here. So if I'm scrolling and I get to here and I just do a little scroll, see how that just moved, and then it will scroll. Or if I'm down the bottom here, whoops, it's halfway down there and I start using my mouse wheel on it, it will scroll into view. Okay, so this here tells it to get the mouse wheel group, so that's the container containing these, and scroll it into view using a smooth behavior. We want it centered. Okay, so that's pretty much what that does. That's the JavaScript that makes this work. And I hope that makes sense. And what I'll do is that in another tutorial, what I'll do is I'll translate this into Elementor, and which is what I'll use for my portfolio. I haven't decided which one of these I'm going to use yet, whether I'm going to use the mouse wheel or just use the mouse over. I think I'm kind of leaning towards the mouse wheel, so it gives the user a little bit of control over what they're scrolling, rather than just pointing your mouse and trying to see what's happening. So yeah, that's the tutorial.